So here is how to this away. All right, so this is the classwork. Let's see the quiz here, dead man's. Anybody who didn't do it, you have to do it. Let me see who turned in. Yes, so sorry, I haven't checked your work because I was extremely busy with other classes. No worries. Today you will be doing a lot of self-work, but let me check here if you missed anything. Thank you so much for having the announcement area filled with class interaction. You secured yourself a good grade here. I wonder the others, they need also to add their input. This one is done, perfect. So if I go back here, check the grades, let me check who's missing. Okay, so far Yusuf and Safa, you are okay, you are on good terms, you're good to go. We have new students, of course, so the new students will have to finish whatever is left. Yes, so we are still in unit 2, which is the short stories. To me, I like it. I feel it's the best unit because every time you are reading about a different story, you are taking things lightly. It's not heavy like, you know, the drama or the plays in Shakespeare. So for today, I would like to share with you some of the the activities that you will be required to do in any work, in any short story or even poem or a play, any literary work. We discussed that we need to talk about the events of the story, starting with the actions, the rising actions, the expository, the beginning, the introductory, and then rising actions, then moving up to the climax where you see the plot. Other terminology, we can say the climax or the peak of the plot. And then we move to the anti-climax, which is the moving towards the resolution or the end of the play or the story or anything. Some of the most important things that we need to take care of, which is the characterization. We paid attention to the terminology characterization, which is how the author created the character, how the author developed the character, starting from where to where to where. And when you are writing about the character, you need also to talk about the appearance of the character. How does it look? How does it wear? What is the uniform? What is the way of talking? If there is any lips in their talking, or if there is any motif, meaning a certain word that is repeated quite oftentimes, because there is an aim, there is a purpose in the writer's head to convey a certain message. Today, we'll be talking also about another important thing when you are asked to analyze a story or a novel or a poem, or of course, any literary work, which is the analysis, full analysis of a story. Let's look here at how to analyze a story. And I want you please to take down notes. What are the elements that you need to write about it? Okay, let's go.
And we're going to be looking at how to analyze a short story. So the definition of
I'm asking, can you hear the video? Can you hear the lecture?
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
Examining the parts to understand the whole. So we look at all the little pieces, in which this case we're looking at the literary elements that are talked about in chapter 6, and we use those to help us understand the theme of the story, the concept that the whole story revolves around, or helps us understand more about. Remember, stories have meaning. The meaning we're looking for right now is the theme, the universal concept the story revolves around. We're examining the parts to understand the whole, the theme. The literary elements we'll look at to help us understand the theme are characterization, setting, point of view, plot, language, style, and tone. All of that is one element. Foreshadowing, symbolism, and irony. And the chapter 6 talks about these more in depth, so I'm going to go on, but I'm going to talk about a couple of those. One of them I'm going to emphasize is characterization or character development. Literary fiction is really focused on how a character is growing, how they're reacting, how they're learning from their experiences. So the character development is going to be very important, especially the main character or the protagonist. And so you think about the author starting from nothing and developing this well-rounded character that we actually care about. And then the author had to think of all these character traits to make them come alive. Things like their age, their gender, what type of job they had, what are their talents, history, their family, friends, their immediate goals, far-reaching goals, what do they like, what do they not like, what is their overall personality, what are their strong points or good virtues, what are the weak points or flaws or fears, what makes them like a real life human being. And so when we are reading the story, we're analyzing and finding all those details as we're looking at what the character does, what they say, how they react to others and to different situations. The setting is the time, place, and the atmosphere in which a story takes place. All that environmental factors go in with setting. In the story of Hour, we see that it's late 1890s, right at the end of the Victorian era. It's in America. It's inside a room of a middle-class home. It's looking out at the street. Springtime, cloudy with patches of blue in the sky, birds singing, merchants selling their wares. So we can start making connections between all these details and understanding what they mean and what type of theme they relate to. For example, being inside a home could be her being inside that room could be symbolic of her being trapped inside herself. As a woman in Victorian age society, she didn't have that many rights to even think or be herself. Springtime is a time of hope and new beginnings. Cloudy with patches of blue. Cloudy means scary, bad, ominous, and patches of blue means a little bit ray of hope, a little way of escape. So we can see these details and start making connections to what the whole story is about. Point of view is all about what type of narrator or storyteller did the author choose to tell the story. If there's a first-person narrator, then the character themselves would be telling a story. If Story of an Hour were in first-person narration, Mrs. Mallard would be saying, well, I went into my room and I just thought and thought and thought. So we would be hearing it from her point of view directly. Later on, we're going to be reading another story, which is in chapter 6, called AMP, which is first person. Third person omniscient, there's a godlike narrator and they're telling the whole story. And they can see everybody's point of view. In the book that we're using this semester, the story The Storm is third person omniscient. Third person limited point of view, that's where the narrator is not a character of the story. They're godlike narrator looking down at all the characters and they can see mainly one main character's thoughts. A third person objective point of view, the narrator is not the character in the story, but he can see and the narrator can see and all the action, hear what they're saying, but it cannot get any very close to their thoughts or feelings. Here's a better look at the third person point of views. Third person omniscient, you see that godlike narrator looking at everybody's thoughts and feelings. Third person limited, they mainly see into one person's thoughts and feelings. And all the rest of the characters are mainly relayed as they are affecting that character. Third person objective, like a fly on the wall, they just stand there and they watch, they listen, but they are not close to the character's thoughts or feelings. In the Story of an Hour, it's most of the time a third person limited narration. Excuse me. So the narrator, it does start out with Richard, as we know a little bit about Richard and what Josephine are thinking, but for the majority of the story, it's third person limited. We're mostly in Mrs. Mallard's thoughts and feelings, the protagonist's thoughts and feelings. When she goes into her room, we get psychically closer. It means we're very psychic. We can see into her thoughts and feelings. We get closer and closer to her psychically until we know more about her feelings than she actually does. So that shows us that the narrator is separate from the character. It actually delves, it's like a ghost possessing her soul. And we actually know that she only loved her husband sometimes. That's something that she wouldn't admit to herself. When she leaves the room, the narrator does start to withdraw from her and look at her a little bit more from the outside perspective. Again, but we're still mainly in her thoughts and feelings. We're not jumping into anybody else's thoughts and feelings. But the very last line is very cold and aloof. So it's interesting that the psychic distance totally withdraws and we're left with an almost objective narrative style that she's dead and all that remains is the cold verdict of society that she's dead and it was the joy that kills. There's a little bit of irony there too, because we know that she didn't die because she was so happy to see her husband alive, but she actually died because she all of a sudden realized that all those years that she was imagining herself living in perfect freedom are now snatched away from her. The plot of a short story. So in the book, it'll show you on the chapter about plot, it'll show you pictures and diagrams of plot, the little triangular plot diagram. But I want to mainly look at a very simple version of plot. Concepts like catalyst, that's the event that sets the story in motion. Conflict, that's what hinders the main character from achieving his or her goals, that struggle within themselves. And then the climax, that's the point where the main character has to make a decision or take a decisive action. At this point, there's no turning back. And then we ask our question there in the following action is, does the character win or lose the prize? Do they gain knowledge or do they gain success? Do they get an awareness, an epiphany moment? Or does the main character lose the prize? Is success snatched away from them? Do they give up? Remember, we're interested in how characters react to conditions provided in the story. In the story of an hour, the catalyst is that she learns about her husband being killed in a train crash. And that conflict is an internal conflict. She's struggling with her feelings, that she's happy that he's gone. And she's wondering, is it okay to be happy? Not so much happy that he's dead, because she still loved him, remember, sometimes, but that she's happy that now she has her own life to live. And at the climax, she's at the top of the stairs. That's very symbolic of the climax. And she's goddess of victory is the words they use. I love that phrase. And she's at the top of the stairs, determined to have a full, happy life of being free and independent. She's reaching for that prize. But did she win? Well, she did win out over herself. She conquered all those fears and inhibitions that society had put on her. But her victory is snatched away by fate. Once she was sick already with a heart problem, she'd gone through a lot of emotional upheaval. But then she sees that all those years are shut. There's no longer, that door is no longer open to her because her husband is alive.
Feel free to keep it together with Bamboo HR. Sign up for a free trial now.
As I'm in the midst of applying for residency right now, wish me luck, Grammarly has again been a lifesaver with my application.
Now we look at, remember, we're going to take all those literary elements.
Pay extra attention to the theme, because this is what you will be asked to write about, the theme of so many stories. And I will be asking you to compare and contrast the theme of whatever in 2 stories or 3. So pay extra attention to what she says about the theme, please.
Elements and help us understand a theme as a universal concept that the story is built around. So the concept is usually an issue that we as a society and human beings need to deal with. So it's going to be common to us as human beings. It could be things like gender expectations. What do our society expect of people to be? If they're a man, they should act like this. If they're a woman, they should act like that. Poverty. How do we make sure that everybody has food and shelter? Coming of age. What are the things people go through as they're going from that transition from being a teenager to an adult? Prejudice, the struggle between good and evil, repression of women, all sorts of different things that we could look at, these issues that could be a theme that we're going to pull from the story. Is there a right or wrong theme? Well, when you're exploring, there could be many, many different themes. The story of an hour deals with a lot of different things, from equality to the repression of women in the Victorian age, to expectations of women, expectations of what a man's supposed to be, family relationships, communications, a lot of different themes. So when you're looking at explore themes that make sense to you based on the details that you find when you're annotating the story. And here's an example of me when I annotated the story. You're going to have the power process that's going to help you, but you want to take that power process and actually build on it, especially when you're going to have to be writing about some of these stories. And when you actually get to where you're writing about a story for your papers, you want to do a lot more annotating on the story, adding to what you already put in the power process. So the things that I noticed when I was annotating the story was a title. This title makes me think of how our lives could change in just 1 hour. That Mrs. Mallard is a married woman. So we see that her Mrs. Mallard, and look at what the names that they use call Mrs. Mallard. Look at when she's actually, they use her first name, Louise, and look at when they're calling her a wife or whatever they're calling her. That's kind of designating what her role is at that moment. She has heart trouble, so I noticed that at the beginning. So there's some foreshadowing. And then they mention that Mrs. Mallard acts differently when she finds out that he's dead. She doesn't act like what most women would. Most women would be in shock and wouldn't be able to process that information that fast. But she starts crying right away. There's lots of words that are kind of spooky, like haunted and possessed and reaching toward her. So different words that are gothic in tone. Spring means new life, new beginnings, happy, refreshing. So I'm wondering, how is this story about someone dying also about someone finding a new beginning? So as you're reading your stories, not just this one, but the stories that we're going to be reading, I want you to delve in and start looking for the details and point out those nuggets of gold that will help you to find out what the message of the story is. What is the meaning that we can pull from the story? What is the theme, the issue that we can learn more about to empathize with other people and under other conditions and to help us solve some problems in this world? Thank you for listening. Talk to you later. Bye.
All right, so this is the most important piece here is when you speak about the theme, it's really important to identify what is the message the author wants to tell you, or what is the moral lesson the author wants to tell you. And the authors use different ways of conveying the message. It's either direct way or an indirect way. If it is explicit, meaning they tell you exactly what they want, or deductive. What does deductive mean? They want the reader to figure out what the writer wants to tell you. They wanted the reader to read between lines what is the aim of the story, of the poem, of the play, all together. And the writers give you clues to help you develop the theme. So it is important for you to understand what is the writer want to tell you, and also the way of speaking, the narrator. Is the writer omniscient, meaning he is using himself as a character within the story, or as a narrator, outside narrator, or from inside the story? All of this I want you to figure out. Do we have any questions here? Start recording. Okay, so now you read about the author for the short story today. As you picked up the information from online, you read about Anton Chekhov, and you know that he is a Russian writer. We call him the father of short stories in Russia. His work is very famous for criticizing some of the social events. He's considered to be a social reformer. He's playwright, he's short writer, write stories. Yes, Yusuf, you got his the date of birth and death correctly. The Cherry Orchard, this is his famous work. I personally remember when I was in high school as a student, I read the wonderful stories, The Odor of Chrysanthemum. This is for Anton Chekhov, and it was explaining the sorrow of being alone and how the old lady found nobody around her but the horse to speak to the horse and tell the horse her own story after her own kids left her. And the horse was just crying for the old lady. Yes, you gave us a good answer here, both of you, Safa and Yusuf. Bravo. All right, so now we will have a look at one of his famous short stories. It's The Death of the Government Clerk. It's absolutely full of irony and criticizing a lot of problems that happen in society. And the beauty of this story, the criticism that you will see in a minute, is not only in Russia, but it can happen anywhere in the world. Let's have a look at the short story, and then after the break, you will be analyzing the story.
By Russian playwright Anton Chekhov in 1883. This amusing tale revolves around Ivan Dmitrievich Chervyakov, a clerk who inadvertently sneezes in the presence of the esteemed General Brizalov. Although the general quickly forgives Ivan, the clerk's subsequent panic and inability to let go of his mistake become increasingly burdensome, ultimately leading to a tragic outcome. Typical of Chekhov's works, The Death of a Government Clerk satirizes the nonsensical logic of bureaucracies and other forms of modern power dynamics. It has been adapted into both a cartoon and a film. The story commences with Ivan seated comfortably in a stall at the opera, enjoying the exquisite music. However, he suddenly sneezes, managing to contain most of it within his handkerchief. When he discreetly checks the box to ensure that his sneeze did not offend anyone, he is horrified to witness an elderly man wiping his neck with a glove. To his dismay, Ivan recognizes the man as General Brizalov from the Department of Transport. Although Ivan and Brizalov are neither acquainted nor connected professionally, Ivan succumbs to panic and utters a quiet apology. Brizalov responds with a casual "never mind," a phrase that leaves Ivan even more anxious due to its open-ended nature. In an attempt to clarify the situation and emphasize that the sneeze was unintentional, Ivan only manages to irritate the general further. He repeatedly apologizes, but his efforts only serve to heighten his discomfort during the opera. In his mind, Ivan misinterprets a supposedly malicious gleam in the general's eyes, leading him to believe that Brizalov secretly believes Ivan purposely spat on him. Upon returning home, Ivan recounts the incident to his wife. Initially worried about potential consequences, she breathes a sigh of relief upon learning that Ivan is employed in a different government department. Naively, she suggests that it might be beneficial for Ivan to offer a personal apology once again, unaware of the absurdity of the situation. The following day at work, Ivan dons a fresh uniform and heads to the general's office to offer his apologies once again. However, his progress is hindered by a group of petitioners being interviewed by Brizalov. Patiently waiting for an opportunity, Ivan finally manages to squeeze in after one petitioner finishes and expresses his regret for his lack of manners. Unfortunately, the general completely disregards him, remaining engrossed in the conversation with the petitioners. Ivan, once again, interprets this reaction as ambiguous, leading him to the dire conclusion that Brizalov is still harboring anger towards him for the sneeze. After the interviews conclude, Ivan seizes another chance to apologize. However, his persistent apologies start to frustrate Brizalov, who perceives Ivan's behavior as mocking. Offended by this accusation, Ivan decides to abandon his attempts to deliver the apology. Returning home, he tries to compose a letter to Brizalov but finds himself suffering from writer's block. Determined one final time, Ivan resolves to return to the general's office to offer his apology in person. This time, there are no petitioners present, and he directly approaches Brizalov. However, the general is clearly upset by Ivan's audacity and sternly orders him to leave. Overwhelmed by despair, Ivan trudges home but falls severely ill during his journey, barely managing to reach his house. Collapsing onto the couch, he succumbs to his illness and passes away. The trivial and unnecessary death of Ivan in The Death of a Government Clerk humorously highlights the peculiar ironies and challenges of adhering to an arbitrary social order, where norms of interaction often obfuscate rather than clarify meaning. It serves as a wry commentary on the strained deference and the absurdities that can arise within such a system. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and be sure to subscribe. Thank you.
Use Kayak's filters to search only the flights you actually want to take. Download the Kayak app now.
Gear up in Helly Hansen workwear at Marks.
By Russian playwright Anton Chekhov in 1880.
Okay, so you get a brief idea about the story and how the clerk of the government was reacting in a very simple action, how this very simple action turned out to be a huge thing and even could lead to tragic ending. So you take your break, and when you come back, you will do analysis to the same story. I will ask you to read the story online and analyze it as per the questions will be given. So can we